Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to iNACOL's October Leadership Webinar. My clock here says 2 p.m. Eastern, so we'll go ahead and get started as a few others will continue to join here. My name is Natalie Abel. I'm a Program Manager here at iNACOL, and I will help to moderate and facilitate today's webinar. So before we turn it over to our presenters, I have just a few administrative items to touch on. I promise not to take up too much of your time. In the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a chat box. Please introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from, any burning questions you brought with us today. And please continue to ask any other questions that you have throughout the webinar. We'll make sure that those get answered either as we go or at the very end during Q&A. We also encourage you to share what you're learning on Twitter. You can use the hashtag assessments and our Twitter handle, which is @NACOL, and you can kind of extend the conversation with your own personal networks there as well. Today's webinar will be recorded and archived on our website at inacol.org. So we'll send you a follow-up email with a link within the next few days where you'll be able to download the slides or access the full webinar recording as well. So you'll definitely be able to refer back to it if you need to. So with that, we are grateful to have Dr. Bonnie Hain of PARCC and Brandt of Smarter Balanced here with us today to discuss rethinking systems of assessments and building educator capacity. So with that, I will gladly turn it over to Bonnie now to kick us off. So Bonnie, it's all you. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Nice to hear and meet everyone today. Hoping you can all hear me well. I'm going to speak a little bit today about a focus on continuous improvement and how our work at PARCC and the work that's being done across the country around next generation assessments really is one focused on ongoing innovation and continuous improvement. To do that, I'm going to start with a look back. Let me jump back for just a moment to the agenda. I'm going to share with folks a quick look at where we've been in terms of PARCC, which I think is a good example of what next generation assessments look like at various state levels. And then I'll speak a little bit about some of the challenges that we face and also the opportunities moving forward. And then I really want to dive in a little bit on the lessons that we've learned and how history can impact our next steps. So let's start with a look back. We've had quite a little bit going on around the work to develop the PARCC assessments. And I'm seeing that some of you are saying that the volume is a little bit high. I'm going to try and lower it. And please do in the chat box let me know if that is a problem for you or continues to be a problem. The start of the PARCC assessments really began in 2010 with the Race to the Top funding program. States came together after the Common Core state standards were approved by state after state after state. And because states wanted to work together, they launched the PARCC Consortium as one of 2 consortiums. Working together, they first began to discuss what the standards should mean in terms of instruction. And with PARCC, one of the things that I think was really important is that folks recognized that if we first defined instruction, then we could go on and develop assessments. So there was not, we did not rush to write items as might have happened in the past. The assessments were developed after, therefore, the model content frameworks which are still available online at parconline.org. Following that, there was a series of decisions made across the states. And one of the most important decisions was that every step of the way they would check the assessment development work against the instructional and standards-based work. So where all of the bullets you see on the screen, you're going to see that they were every bit of it, the college and career ready determinations, the sample items, the field testing, all of that work was checked consistently against those model content frameworks and against the standards. And I think that that's one of the important lessons from where we've been, that the standards and instruction should always be driving any discussion around assessment. The result of that constant and unrelentless connection between the quality of the standards, the quality of the assessments, was that we have new assessments that really are demonstrably better than prior assessments. And you see on the screen some of the independent studies that have been done emphasizing the quality of those assessments. And the key here, you'll see over and over again, is that the teachers, the educators, see an alignment between what they're teaching in the classroom and what's being measured on the assessments. And that, of course, is what teachers and educators need to have confidence that the data that they get from those assessments really can drive next steps instruction. So what are some of our challenges and opportunities moving forward? Well, ESSA has certainly provided both challenges and opportunities. Some of the things that we see in ESSA are really the same as prior policy. There's still annual testing for grades 3 to 8 and once in high school for English language arts and mathematics. All students except a very small few will take tests in each grade with nationally recognized high school tests and an 8th grade math test. And here we now have under ESSA the ability for 8th graders to take the algebra test, for example, in place of 8th grade. That's something that is an opportunity. One of the opportunities with these assessments is that they need to be accessible to English language learners and students with disabilities in ways that are, in some sense, unprecedented. And this is a huge opportunity for us as we understand that accessibility and inclusion of all students is critical for the equity agenda in education, where we want all of our children to be successful and graduate ready for college and careers. And of course, with ESSA now, one of the opportunities is that tests can be given in smaller, what we might think of as interim ways. And states and districts, I think, are looking very carefully at what that might look like over the coming years. So that's something to keep our eyes on. Another thing to keep in mind in terms of challenges and opportunities, that flexibility is key. With the new law, what you see over and over again is that states and districts were looking for some flexibility in how they approach the assessment of the standards, and the new law and policy really is building in many different ways for flexibility to occur. At PARCC, as we pondered this flexibility, one of the things that we saw was a shift from all of the content being delivered solely through a consortium view to multiple ways for states to use the high-quality PARCC content. So we do still have a group of states working together as consortiums, as member states. They're using a common vendor, common forms, common administration, scoring, analysis, and reporting policies and procedures. But we also have two other ways that states can use PARCC content. And one of those ways is that they can still use the same PARCC forms and still use the same test delivery system, but they can use a different vendor for test delivery. And then still a third opportunity for flexibility is that they can take packages of content which may or may not follow the PARCC blueprint, put those together, use a different vendor, and they can choose which of the PARCC test delivery options they want for administration or scoring or analysis, so they can really pick and choose to develop a state assessment that really meets their individual needs. So lots of high quality content aligned to the standards, aligned to instruction, with a number of ways for states to work together and to avail themselves of this high quality content. I mentioned equity previously, and I think it's important to recognize that all of this work in putting together assessments and instructional tools and professional learning services that go with it are all designed to increase access to rigorous learning for all. And I know across the United States, educators are committed to making sure that all of our students have these opportunities. So the flexibility in assessment development is connected, I think, always to this equity lens. One of the things that we do at PARCC in order to meet this equity agenda is to make sure that we're always involving teachers. We like to say work done by educators for educators, and making sure that in every opportunity, educators are weighing in and sharing their best thinking as we move forward, because we know that the educators closest to the students really can talk in ways that are important for our work, so that all students really can be actively engaged in the assessments that are being developed and the instructional tools that are being developed. I will say that one of the differences, I think, between current state assessments and some of the prior years is that there are a tremendous number of formative and instructional tool and professional learning service opportunities that are being wrapped in and wrapped around the work, so that teachers really can have the greatest opportunity to help our students succeed. So what are some of the lessons learned that I can share around how our history might work through as we meet some of the challenges and opportunities that I shared? I think one of the most important things that we can look to is the use of evidence-centered design in the creation of our assessments. Evidence-centered design is a backwards design theoretical approach that's been made practical in the development of next-generation assessments aligned with college and career readiness standards. It's a deliberate and systematic approach to assessment development. The work begins when we design using evidence-centered design by first selecting and writing claim statements. That is, we begin with the inferences that we want to make about students. Having developed those claims, we then move to evidences. We develop lists of the kinds of evidence we would need to see in student work products that would allow us to make those claims. Then and only then do we develop tasks and items that will allow us to elicit those specific evidences and that will then allow us to support claims. And I think any assessment system at this point, whether it's a classroom-based assessment of teachers making an assessment, or a district-developed assessment, or a state assessment, would do well to begin from this backward design of evidence-centered design. We see great work happening as a result of this kind of thinking. It aligns also with curriculum work that's being done across the United States using that understanding by design structure. So the two work hand in hand in very logical ways. Evidence-centered design helps us to meet that next learning piece, which is the ensuring of alignment Alignment, not just of a single standard to an item on an assessment, but a deeper alignment. Alignment, first of all, vertically from pre-K to college, where one can see logically the progressions of learning and therefore of assessment. Alignment of the standards to tools and resources and to the assessments. And then that all-important alignment between instruction and assessment, so that every step of the way, teachers and students and parents are seeing the connections always between one piece of learning and the next piece of learning. So it's all very logically connected, like a well-drawn argument. Another incredibly important learning from the work that's been done on college and career-ready assessments is on the importance of focusing on learning first and on innovating from there. And on the screen you see some of the examples of that from the work that we've done at PARCC. So the model content frameworks, which spell out how one might interpret the standards in logical ways instructionally, how one might consider putting together unit plans, how one might consider how to emphasize the standards from a content perspective. That translates then into the development of task models for performance-based tasks, and then into actual instructional units that incorporate formatively the same kinds of evidences that one is going to see on a summative state assessment. Tying, again, all of those pieces together through alignment and through careful work allows for that emphasis to be on learning and the assessment to reflect that learning rather than the other way around. Another thing that's happened is innovation with item and task types. You see on the screen an example of a technology-enhanced item in English language arts. There you see that the students are being asked to create a summary through a drag-and-drop model. Initially, this type of item was conceived as a constructive response item, right? We would ask the student to simply produce, to write a summary. You can imagine how much more testing time is needed for a student to write out a full summary. By putting this item into a technology-enhanced version, we can still determine whether a student is able to summarize the text as the standards call for, but it's a much faster, quicker way to measure that same skill set. It's also a machine scorable item, which means that the costs for scoring are much reduced. So we're reducing both the cost of assessment and the amount of time that a student needs to show us what they know. So this does not mean that we will never have constructive response or writing items. There are, of course, constructive response items and hand-scored items on the PARCC assessment. But by innovating with some of these technology types, we're able to allow students to show us what they know in a more cost-effective and time-effective way. And I believe that as we move forward, there are going to be more and more opportunities for technology-enhanced items to show construction of meaning in the most rigorous ways, and that this will allow us to get more information in a more efficient manner. The other thing that is really important about these innovative item and task types is that they mirror typically more of what's happening in our classrooms. As technology is entering our classrooms, teachers are better able to use these kinds of skill sets for everyday teaching. So that English language arts item that I just spoke about, it mirrors very closely what we used to do with scented strips in the classroom with paper and pencil. We might ask students to use sentence strips and reorder them to create a summary. So This, again, this connection on instruction and assessment and the item innovations, allowing us to make those connections, I think is critical for next steps assessment work, whether, again, it's at the local or state level. Another really critical piece of work that we've learned is that it's so important to do ongoing research, high-quality research, to learn as much as we can about how the assessments are able to impact instruction effectively. And on the screen you see some of the types of research studies that have been done to date. Think about how important it is that we've learned that certain types of items really do ask for higher cognitive demand. We might have surmised that based on verbs in an item. Having field test studies and actual studies that show us where that cognitive complexity is really increasing, where there's greater difficulty, real quantitative data to match up with what we are hypothesizing is happening, I think is critical for us as a field to ensure that the assessments that we're developing are as fair and as equitable as possible. A similar thought goes in when we think about the accessibility of those new items, making sure that it's really true that a particular item type doesn't bias against a particular population of students. I think it's critical for us to do that kind of work. And whether we're doing that work at the local level or at the state level, this kind of research is most important for our students. And then I'll end and turn over in a moment to our next speaker, Brandt Reed, by sharing that it is going to be important for us to maintain that quality through the involvement of our teachers. I can't say it enough. The teachers are the ones who have the closest relationship with the students that are being assessed, and they have insights that just simply cannot be ignored. So we get high quality work when our teachers are at the table as active participants in the development of our assessments rather than as purely receivers of those assessments. And at PARCC we have really spent a considerable amount of time and through every step of the process making sure that teachers are there, and we believe that regardless of the type of assessment, this involvement of teachers should be at the forefront in every piece of work that's done. And with that, I'll turn over to our next speaker, to Brandt Reed, and I will answer any questions after he has had an opportunity to present.
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you all for joining. Hope everyone can hear me okay. I think everyone knows we will be sharing, or INACOL will be sharing these slides and also the recording after the fact. So if you want to look at the contact information or the references and so on that we make, that's all going to be available to you. I want to introduce Smarter Balance a little bit to you. Like PARCC, we are a state membership organization, and we're formed approximately the same time. We have 15 governing states, 2 affiliate states, and then the U.S. Virgin Islands and the Bureau of Indian Education. This represents approximately 6.5 million students, and we have approximately 650,000 educators registered to use our digital library within these member states. And the framework of this is very much like what Bonnie was just discussing. We are based on the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts and Mathematics. Smarter Balanced is unique in that we provide a computer adaptive test. What this means is that as the student is taking the test, there's an adaptive engine that is choosing which question to present to the student next based on their prior performance. The biggest benefit of a computer adaptive test is that we can get more precise measurement of student skills, especially when they're towards the edge of either above or below what the mean would be, or well towards the or well away from the mean. A test that's centered on the mean level, that's fixed form, would be able to give you a high degree of accuracy as the student is close to that mean, and then your margin of error increases the further away you get from that. And by going to a computer adaptive test, we can start to select questions that are near that student's skill level and get a more precise measure of that. That's really valuable for providing feedback to educators as well as parents on both where the student is today and also what their growth has been year over year. It doesn't improve our ability to do the old traditional how many students achieve proficiency in a particular year, which is what No Child Left Behind kind of instituted. But it is much, we find that it's the focus of this improvement on informing education is a really valuable improvement there on the computer adaptive test. We have a variety of both constructed response and selected response item types. For those not familiar with these terms, a selected response is where we've pre-composed what the student could answer, and they choose among those. So that would include the traditional multiple choice and true-false type questions. It also includes matching and some forms of drag and drop. And then a constructed response is where the student is expected to compose an answer. And those go all the way from essay-type questions, where they're doing a long write, to short answers, but it also involves in the mathematics and scientific domains the ability to respond with an equation or an expression, and also we have items where the students plot on a graph points and lines and diagrams. These constructed response items, in many cases, can be computer scored, but in the case of the full rights and so forth, requires human scoring in many cases. And we have achieved an unprecedented level of accessibility on a large-scale test with multiple forms of Braille, American Sign Language. We have tactile graphics for mathematics questions, and numerous other features that make the test accessible for students with a wide variety of disabilities. So this is a slide that Smarter Bounds has been using for almost 5 years now, but we like it because it really summarizes what our concept is here. We have students that are striving to achieve the standards in the Common Core and ensure that those students meet expectations for college and career readiness. And we have 3 primary tools that Smarter Balanced offers to assist educators in doing that. Obviously, educators need more than our tools, but these are the ones that we offer. At the apex of this triangle here, we have the Summative Assessments. And this is what everyone is expecting of us, the big year-end assessments that provide a point-in-time score indicating what the student's proficiency level is at the end of that year, and hopefully being comparable to prior and successive years so that we can start to measure a sense of achievements over time for those students. To the lower right of that triangle are our interim assessments, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about these, but these are assessments that are at the discretion of the school and districts, or even individual teachers, depending on local policy, to use along the way to better inform the instruction that follows. And then finally is the formative assessment practices. which focus on assessment in the classroom that is specifically designed to help the teachers and students gain greater insight into their knowledge of this area of understanding. And these Smarter Balance does not provide formative assessment items per se, because it doesn't really fit into that concept. Instead, we have a digital library of materials to help teachers understand the formative assessment concept and resources they can use as they prepare lesson plans and classroom activities, with formative assessment integrated into that process. And all of this is driving towards the goal of all students leaving high school, college, and career ready. So a little bit about online assessment, since this is where Smarter Balance and PARCC both have our focus. You can see that online assessment is rapidly growing throughout the country, and both PARCC and Smarter Balance concentrate on online assessment as our primary delivery vehicle. We have also had to capitulate to the realities that there are certain schools that, either for idealistic or religious reasons, will not do an online test. And so we do offer a paper and pencil alternative with declining interest in that, but probably enough need that it will be around for quite some time. And here is our results from the spring 2015 test. We're still tabulating the results from 2016 of which devices are being used. So this gives you an idea in online assessment, but also in online instruction, what kinds of technology schools are deploying and how that's being used. So I want to put this in context, both of the political climate and in the theories of educational improvement, and if at all possible, I'll try to tie this into the competency education initiatives that INACOL has been moving forward. And as we've looked at this, I really have identified three theories of educational improvement that have become manifest in government, policy, and advocacy groups. And this is theory one. It's the standards and accountability theory, and it's best manifest in the No Child Left Behind legislation in the back from roughly 2001. And No Child Left Behind required states who are receiving federal funding, which it means all of them, to create standards for achievements and deliver assessments that are associated with those standards. And it's based on the theory, and this is, when I was in business school, this was a maxim that was given to us. It turns out that the maxim isn't quite as reliable as we might expect, but it says that if you measure something and you report that measurement back to the organization that has influence over it, then that measure will improve. And so that's essentially what we've been doing, is establishing a standard of performance, measuring against that standard, and then reporting back. And we've been doing that for approximately 15 years. And you can see in these graphs that the impact on nationwide scores in reading and mathematics have been very modest. And that's because while this is a helpful platform, it turns out that if you don't know the formula, or if it's not widespread understanding of how to improve something, then just because you're measuring it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to improve. And that's actually turned out to be quite a challenge. INACOL is one of the most important organizations that's out there helping us understand what it is that helps students learn better. But it's not an easy problem to answer. If the answers were simple, then I think No Child Left Behind would also have been successful. But these aren't simple answers. And so we moved to theory number two, which was also embedded in No Child Left Behind, and this is the concept of a highly qualified teacher. And indeed, well-qualified teachers are tremendously important in the student achievement. This is actually based on a study that was commissioned by the Gates Foundation, and it divides up what are the contributors to the variation in student performance, really trying to get a handle on the achievement gap, among other things. What we find is that the teacher is among the greatest influences at 8.5% of that variance in student performance. The rest of the school accounts for about 12.5, so you combine those together and you get about 20% of the variance in student performance is attributable to the school. This contrasts with 60% of the variance that's attributable to their background, meaning their family, their neighborhood, cultural norms, and those kinds of things. And then finally, we've got another 20% or 19% that's unknown factors. So while achieving a highly qualified teacher is very important, and improving the quality of the school is very important, what we find is that that alone is not sufficient to achieve our goal of all children achieving college and career readiness. There are a couple of ways to think about it. One is to kind of capitulate and say, look, background is 60%. There's nothing we can do to overcome that. Or the other approach is to say, these aren't fixed influences. The influence of the school can be increased through various techniques. And we see through efforts like the Harlem Children's Zone is probably a good example, and there are a number of others, where we start to develop outreach programs or better understanding of student needs, or holistic education programs which can indeed increase the influence that the school or the educational system might have over student performance. So this takes us to theory number 3, which is personalized learning, also known as competency-based learning. And I shouldn't make those synonymous. There are distinct differences, but these are closely related, and both approaches have a great deal of respect for the other. And so in some rigorous studies, we found that personalized learning programs consistently achieve 1 to 2 standard deviations better performance than conventional means of instruction. And it's using certain ways of measuring, we can find that this is 2 to 3 times improvement in annual progress for students. We've had situations where a personalized learning program has taken a child who's 2 years or more behind in their achievement and brought them to a par level in only a year's worth of instruction. What we found with personalized learning is that it's challenging. It's hard to scale. So you can do personalized learning extremely well when you're in a one-on-one tutoring situation, when you have a mathematics teacher who has 150 students spread across 4 different periods. Being able to personalize the learning to each of those individual students' needs is a challenge. But we have a lot of initiatives, a lot of research going into this area, and particularly technology supports for the teacher. And I'm being very careful in my choice of words there. We find that when you substitute an online tutor for the teacher, you get roughly the same performance, or usually lower performance than you get from conventional instruction. So this blended learning programs that provide technological supports for teachers seem to be the ones that are showing the most promise in student learning. So based on these theories, then, I want to fold this back into what it is that we're doing at Smarter Balanced that helps that movement towards greater achievement among students. And earlier, in that triangle diagram, I showed you the assessment types. What I'm going to do is go into a little bit more detail about our assessment types, which are the formative, the interim comprehensive. Oh, this slide got messed up. I apologize. We have the formative, the interim comprehensive, the interim assessment blocks, and then there are other kinds of assessments, though Smarter Balance doesn't directly provide those. They oftentimes are part of a complete learning system. And, oh, this is the slide I was trying to refer to. Okay, sorry about that. Going forward, so the summative assessment, this is the year-end assessment typically, although we're looking at ways of maybe embedding it into the curriculum in better ways, so that instead of it being a year-end event, it can be something that's embedded in existing student activities. But at least for the foreseeable future, the next 3 to 5 years, summative assessment is going to continue to be an end-of-year event. And what summative can do is give us a reliable indication of the overall achievement of individuals, classes, and schools as of that particular point in time. It can give us a breakdown by skill categories such as reading, writing, listening, and research. And in fact, those 4 particular examples are the ones that Smarter Balance uses in our claim score breakdown. These are the 4 claims that we use in English language arts. And so when we report on achievements either for a student or for a school or across an entire state, we can give you the achievement levels in those 4 areas. A summative assessment, if handled well, particularly if it provides a scale score and not simply a threshold of above or below a certain level, can indicate year-over-year growth for students and for cohorts. What a summative assessment cannot do is give us a reliable understanding of the student's proficiency on specific skills. And that was one of the early goals that we had at Smarter Balance. We wanted to be able to give the teacher of an incoming student a report that says, you know, this student is really good on fractions, they have trouble with the transitive rule in mathematics, but they're extremely efficient in their times tables, something like that. Turns out that we estimated it would take a week or more of assessments to be able to give that level of detail. And that's simply impractical for us to do that sort of thing. And so we have to take a pragmatic approach to summative assessment and offer this level of detail that you have here. And then bring in other tools for when we need to understand the student's skill set better than that. The next form that Smarter Balanced offers is the Interim Comprehensive Assessment. It's modeled much in the same form as the year-end summative assessment, but this is can be given at any time during the school year. It's kind of a guidepost. It says how well are we tracking towards the year-end summative assessment. And because it's designed in the same way, it has the same strengths and limitations. The only difference is that the point in time has shifted. But there's also another use of the Interim Comprehensive Assessment. Like all of our interim assessments, Smarter Balance does not require that they be given in a carefully proctored context. We have informal use of these assessments. Sometimes an entire class will take the assessment together. They may all be online with their individual consoles, but they're talking about it. They're discussing the questions as they come up. They're sharing their insights with their neighbors and so on. And that kind of an informal administration of the assessment doesn't give as reliable a score, of course, but it can be a very valuable learning experience. And one of the mistakes that's made way too often in assessment is to forget that our goal is to teach. Assessment is a tool for teaching, not the other way around. And so if we use an assessment in a different way that's a more effective teaching tool, and we compromise on the effectiveness of the measurement, that's a reasonable compromise and a very good idea to do. Then the next form of interim assessment are our interim assessment blocks. These are shorter tests that focus on a particular area or skill set. And you can see some examples there on the screen from English language arts and from mathematics. And these do provide more detailed guidance about whether a student has achieved proficiency level on a particular set of skills. But because they're focused in that area, they don't give an overall achievement score the way that the summative or the interim comprehensive might. And again, like the interim comprehensive, these tools are well suited for classroom activities or informal administrations of the test. And finally, we want to talk about the formative assessment process, and this is where the Smarter Balanced Digital Library comes into play. And for those of you who are educators in Smarter Balanced member states, I encourage you to actually get onto the digital library and work with the tools. In addition to the resources for helping you in the classroom itself, we also have training resources on how to use the digital library and the other assessments effectively. But the concept of formative assessment in the Smarter Balanced context is that we're striving to achieve 4 goals. Clarify intended learning, elicit evidence of what the student understands, interpret that evidence, and then act on the evidence. And want to revert back to that first bullet point, clarify intended learning. That's clarifying to the students. So by using a formative activity in the classroom, the students gains a much greater understanding of the skill that they're expected to achieve because they're actually going through an example of that. This is a huge domain and well beyond the amount of time that I have to spend on it. I just want to say that we consider this to be an essential pillar to effective assessment is it's the formative. And that's because this is the earliest in the learning process. And so it has the greatest opportunity to affect the subsequent learning activities choices that a student makes. Just wrapping up real quick, this is some of the, we haven't, our states release the test results, not Smarter Balanced. In fact, we don't even see them because each state contracts with an independent provider. So we get the information at the same time as the public does. But these are results that have been released within the last month and a half approximately, and other states will be following suit soon. The key thing that I wanted to point out here is that it seems to be working. We've only had 2 operational assessments so far, and in every case that's released results so far, we have seen growth in student performance, and that's really exciting. It gives us some hope that what we're doing is going to make a real difference in students' lives. I'll caveat that with it could also have to do with increased familiarity with the testing platform and the framework and how we do this, and not be as reflective of student skill. But we have worked very, very hard to make sure that our tests are sensitive to student skills and are not sensitive to things that external factors such as skill in taking tests, for example, that sort of thing. So we think these are promising results, and we think they're indicative of a real improvement in how students are learning and growing. And we hope that Smarter Balanced is at least a small part of that improvement. And that's the end of my formal presentation. I think what we're going to do is take questions for both Bonnie and myself. And so I'll hand it back to our moderator, and we'll take questions.
Great. Thank you both so very much. We will now formally open Q&A, so please throw any questions you might have into the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Or you can raise your hand and we can call on you, and you can use the talk button and you can ask your question out loud. But I think that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for your insights on next generation assessment, tying it to equity, and maintaining a high bar for quality, linking it to personalized learning. Brandt, I really loved, it's such a good reminder to think of assessment as a tool for teaching, and I think that's something that's easy to forget. But certainly thank you both very much. We just received a question from Dr. Brown. He asked if there has been a crosswalk of Smarter Balanced assessments with PARCC assessments. If either of you want to take a stab at answering this question.
I'll give it a go. I am not the best equipped at Smarter Balanced to answer this question, and maybe Bonnie can fill in a little bit. There have been some comparative studies, not with the I don't think anybody has attempted to indicate one being superior to another, more of a compare and contrast between the assessments. And also there has been some desire to be able to convert the scores that you get on a Smarter Balance assessment to a similar score on PARCC and vice versa. I would say that all of those are modest efforts and things that I wouldn't point to as being super reliable. The compare and contrast is helpful because there are substantial and easy to identify differences in our approaches. Some of the big ones being a greater effort on PARCC's part for diagnostic assessment and a greater effort on Smarter Balance's part on computer adaptive assessment. So, Bonnie, maybe you have some other thoughts or information about that.
Sure. I think there has not been the crosswalk in terms of the data comparison that many of us thought would occur early in the process. That said, there have been several studies of input looking at the features of the assessments very closely, especially in light of the instructional shifts that were called for by the standards. Probably the best known study was quite extensive. Both Smarter Balance and PARCC both participated by providing large amounts of material to the Fordham Humro study that came out in the fall. Mm-hmm. And I would encourage people, if they have an opportunity, to go look for that on the Fordham website. I believe you can find the results of that study. There also, of course, has been the New Teacher of the Year study around the assessments that also provides some interesting information. And as you said, really describing and comparing and contrasting the features. So not so much, there are evaluative sections of both of those studies, but I think the most usefulness of those studies really comes in for people trying to understand what is the same and what is different as they try to make sense of them. I think one of the most important things that came out of those studies are some of the information about how to interpret cognitive complexity in relation to the standards and the items. So that may be of interest to some of the folks that are participating in the webinar.
Great, thank you. Yes, those very good points. It's interesting, you know, Brandt, I love what you said too about teaching the whole child, and it's hard to assess, you know, all these different skills and habits and knowledge and content. We did just get another question from Dale Frost with iNACOL, and he said, you both spoke of interim assessments now being allowed under ESSA, the new federal K-12 education law. Have any states engaged with you to implement interim assessments in their state systems? And also, does PARCC or Smarter Balance have functionality to allow students to take interim assessments when students are ready to enable competency-based approaches?
I'll go ahead and start and then turn over to Brandt to speak about how Smarter Balance has approached their interim. PARCC is just beginning to work with states around interim. It is under that flexibility that I spoke about, so it's not PARCC, the full consortium, but states looking at PARCC Inc. to help them to develop interim assessments that are aligned to the standards and that work well with the PARCC consortium content for state assessments. As we are working with them on the assessments, it is clear that there is interest in that competency-based approach. PARCC's diagnostic assessments, also called PREBI-LEARN, those assessments do allow for teachers to choose and districts to choose when they give individual students or groups of students the assessments. So there is an opportunity to grow that competency-based approach, and I expect that that will be something that will happen over the course of time within the next year or two.
For Smarter Balance part, we didn't have to wait for the ESSA changes to feel like interim assessments would be effective for students. And so we have had interim assessments as part of our package from the very beginning. And so our states have been administering interim assessments for 2 school years so far, and we're going into our 3rd school year right now. And just as an example, in California alone, there were more than 5 million Smarter Balance interim assessments administered last year. So if you include our other, I happen to know that because Smarter Balance directly handles reporting on those interims for California, whereas other member states have enlisted other reporting organizations. So I don't have quite as much insight into the degree of, or how many interim assessments have been administered there. But they have been actually impressively popular to us, more popular than we were anticipating. The flexibility that ESSA gives us is allows the states to actually incorporate the results of those interim assessments into their overall measure of student achievement. And we're still exploring exactly what our recommendations will be to the states on how they might make use of that flexibility. We have had some discussions with our technical advisory group. In fact, just last week was our most recent TAG meeting. And they are starting to make some recommendations, but we're in the early stages of that right now. So for the moment, the interim assessments are used strictly on a local level to inform local educators. But the prospect of a broader use of that is certainly something under consideration.
Great, thank you. Dale says thank you too. We appreciate your insights there on that. That's something that we certainly work a lot on. We did have one, this is probably the last question we can get to today, but one more question from Consuelo. He said there seems to be a directive that the NWEA MAP be taken 3 times per year, and the 3rd assessment coincides with Smarter Balance. Do you have any news on these 2 tests working together?
No, I'm familiar with the MAP test, and it has a little bit of a different orientation from the Smarter Balance test in terms of the kinds of things that it can inform. We view it as complementary to the type of assessment we do, but no, no discussion that I'm aware of about any integrated administration of those.
Great, thank you. I don't see anyone else typing right now, but if you do have any last-minute questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat box. And like Brandt and Bonnie mentioned, we will have these slides and full webinar recording available for you on our website within the next couple days. So we'll follow up with an email for you to access those items, and you can find their contact information there too if you want to reach out individually, or you can reach out to us at iNACOL, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have for us. And also be sure to check our website too for upcoming webinars. We have another webinar next week on instructional tools for personalized learning. We're featuring Buddy and Brooke Berry of Eminence Independent School District. And we'll share insights from a superintendent and a student on personalized learning. And I haven't seen any other questions. So with that, I hope to see you all in San Antonio, Texas for the iNACOL Symposium, which is just a couple weeks away now. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks again for attending.